Ladies and gentlemen, these are going to be my final thoughts on Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin. As you know, I scored the fight in favor of Canelo Alvarez 9-3, and I still hold my opinion that Canelo Alvarez won the majority of rounds of the fight and that this fight could have a wide margin like how Adelaide Byrd had the fight scored. And I gave you criteria about it. You can always go and check out my blow-by-blow comments on the fight as it's happening. I can leave the link in the description and the comment section below. However, it's not up to me to determine who wins a fight. It's up to the judges. And we actually had a discussion about the judges and Adelaide Byrd's score, and even comments about judging in boxing. And you can see more of this in Pound for Pound Boxing Report, which I also participated in. And Michael and Gail and two other guests were there, Daniel and I forgot the other guest's name. You got to forgive me for that. We discussed the fight amongst other things and other fights. So I'll leave the links for that in the description and comment section below as well, just like my commentary on the fight. However, like I said, the boxers are fully aware that this fight is being scored by judges. So they are performing in front of judges for them, and they know this. So a number of important things I want to mention about judging, and then I'll go into some other bits and pieces about what I thought about with this fight, how the judges may have their points, and what could be done better. Maybe I'll just briefly sprinkle on that. But if we look at the Golovkin versus Saul Canelo Alvarez fight this year, okay, we see here Adelaide Byrd's score is the outlier. You have Dave Moretti and Don Trella, whose scores are pretty close to each other. But then you have this big outlier, and that's what caused the big uproar, because Adelaide Byrd's score seemed to be way out there and to Canelo's favor. And that's understandable when you look at the history of Canelo and his fights. When he faced Austin Trout, there was this wide scorecard by Chris Dulau in favor of Canelo, where I also couldn't see how it could be that wide. Okay, I thought that Trout won some rounds. And then in his fight against Floyd Mayweather, C.J. Ross scored it a draw, and there's no way in God's green earth it was a draw. Even Canelo said no to that scorecard. He couldn't believe it. And then we had the fight with Erislandy Lara, in which Martinez scored the fight 9 rounds to 2, which is ridiculous. I mean, there's no way it was 9 rounds to 2, because Erislandy Lara beat Canelo for at least 3 rounds. The first 3 rounds were all Erislandy Lara. He won those first 3 rounds. So it could never be 9 rounds to 2. Oh, no, this is 9 rounds to 3. Sorry, my bad. But he's saying that Erislandy Lara didn't win a single round after the 3rd round. Okay? That Canelo won every single round after that. And, well, I could kind of see that, but people still thought it was a close fight. And so I didn't have it 9 rounds to 3. I had it, I believe it was 7 rounds to 5, or I believe it was, because I thought Erislandy Lara came back in the 10th round, or 8 to 4. I thought that was better. Now we have Adelaide Byrd, who scored the fight 118-110. And so people, because Canelo's had this history of some judge somewhere scoring in his favor, people are calling it foul play. That Golden Boy has somebody in their back pocket in every single fight. Maybe so, but I can rationalize why Adelaide Byrd could have it 118-110. I really could for this fight. Can't rationalize C.J. Ross's score. Can't rationalize Christo Dalu's score at all. I really can't. And I could kind of rationalize Martinez's score. Lara winning the first 3 rounds, and he's saying he didn't win any more rounds. You know, I think he won the 10th. I think he even won the 11th, if I'm not mistaken. 10th and 11th. So that would mean he actually won 5 rounds. So it would be a closer fight. But nonetheless, my point is, Canelo's had a history with that. So I can understand why people would have an outrage when the scorecard by Adelaide Byrd is so wide. However, just this year, such things have happened where you have an outlier judge. 2 judges agreeing on something, and then the 3rd judge is just totally either the opposite, or it's someone who is doing something where it's wide. It's super wide. Okay? So if we look here, David Benavidez versus Ronald Gavril, we see that Adelaide Byrd scored 116-111. 116-111 in favor of Benavidez because Benavidez was dropped in round 12. So instead of 117-111, it's 116-111. That means 9 rounds to 3. Dave Moretti had it 117-111. Not quite sure how he gets 117-111. Maybe he meant 117-112, maybe? That would make 117, let me see. 117, maybe 110. 117-110 sounds more like it. Not 117-111. That's 9 rounds to 3. Maybe he means 10 rounds to 2. Somewhere he made a mistake. Glenn Drawbridge had it the opposite direction completely, which was 111-116, which is 8 rounds to 4 for Gavril. So Glenn Drawbridge had 8 rounds to 4 for Gavril. Adelaide Byrd had it 8 rounds to 4 for Benavidez. And Dave Moretti had it, I don't know if that's 10 rounds to 2 or 9 rounds to 3. I'm not sure. This score literally means 9 rounds to 3, but Benavidez got knocked down, so I'm not quite sure what Dave Moretti's scoring there. That's kind of fishy. But at the end of the day, Byrd and Moretti, they seem to agree, and Glenn Drawbridge seems to be way off. How did I agree with Glenn Drawbridge? I thought that Ronald Gavril actually won that fight. And I also agree with Adelaide Byrd that I thought Alvarez won that fight. Not quite by this margin, but very close to it. And with Glenn Drawbridge, I thought that Gavril won at least 8 rounds to 4. Yes, I could see that happening. Because I thought that David Benavidez did land some good punches on Ronald Gavril in certain rounds, but most of the time he was hitting arms and gloves, and Gavril was the one doing all the body punching. Again, I don't know if judges pay attention to the body punching or not. So that's one of the fights, just 8 days before this fight, where the judges didn't agree. Okay? 2 judges agreed, and 1 judge just completely didn't agree. We also had it again this year with Horacio Garcia versus Fernando Vargas. In this fight, Lisa Giampa and Dave Moretti scored the fight close. Basically, both fighters winning 4 rounds. However, Richard Ocasio, he had this fight scored wide for Horacio Garcia. He had this fight scored 6 rounds to 2. 6 rounds to 2, that's right, for Horacio Garcia, which is the majority of rounds. And what are we to believe? Are we to believe that it was a close fight? Or are we to believe that the fight was a wide fight, which Horacio Garcia won much more rounds than Fernando Vargas? That's the question. So in this year alone, you see that there are 2 other fights where this has happened. Okay? And then last year, we also had it with Abner Mares, just the end of last year. Abner Mares versus Jesus Cuela. We see that Dave Moretti has it for Abner Mares and Max DeLuca. Dave Moretti has it 8 rounds to 2. Max DeLuca has it 9 rounds to 3. 8 rounds to 4. Max DeLuca has it 9 rounds to 3. Cuela was knocked down in round 11. And Kermit Bayless, for some reason or the other, has it 8 rounds to 4 for Cuela. You could be scratching your head saying, how did that happen? Right? He has it completely the opposite direction. So this commonly happens in boxing, okay? Now, whether there's corruption or not, sometimes it's not. The fight's pretty small. It just happens. Judges do that. Now, why could that possibly happen? Well, let me give you an example of why that could possibly happen. If we look at the fight, Erislandy Lara versus Alfredo Angulo, okay? This fight is Erislandy Lara versus Alfredo Angulo, where Lara stops Angulo, and he doesn't really stop him, but he hits him with a punch thumbs Angulo in the eye, and so Angulo's eye starts to swell up, and because of that, Angulo can't continue the fight, so he gets a TKO win. In this fight, Angulo knocks down Lara twice in round 4 and round 9. It looked like he was going to finish him, and Lara was fighting back, but he got thumbed in the eye, and that was that. And he had to actually go to the doctor, and they had to fix his eye. And he wears glasses to this day. Now, Alfredo Angulo was a heavy underdog in that fight. Lara was supposed to just beat him and win, even though Angulo was a guy that stopped a number of notable people, and he was considered a dog. In fact, Angulo was called the dog. If you look at the scoring for this fight, it's very interesting. You have Marty Denkin, who scored the fight for Erislandy Lara. And he scored the fight wide for Erislandy Lara. Okay? He scored it 86 to 83, which basically is 7 rounds to 3. Okay? He had Erislandy Lara 7 rounds to 3. All right? Max DeLuca, on the other hand, scored the fight 84-85, and Robert Hoyle scored it 84-85. A close fight, giving it to Angulo. Both of them gave it to Angulo at the point of the stoppage. Now that makes sense because Angulo knocked down Lara twice, so he had two 2-point rounds, which would close down any lead that Lara had within that point in time. Angulo would make it back up because he had gained 4 points on Lara. Now, again, why would this judge, Marty Denkin, score the fight for Lara? Well, possibly Marty Denkin is looking at Lara scoring all those punches on Angulo. He's outscoring Angulo. He's moving around the ring. He's doing what Erislandy Lara does. And so he's thinking that even though Lara gets knocked down, and then he gets knocked down a second time, he's winning the fight. However, Max DeLuca and Robert Hoyle note that the pressure that Angulo is putting on Lara, even though Lara is winning rounds, Angulo finally gets to Lara and knocks him down, and then in round 9, when he knocks him down again, it proves the point that a pressure fighter doesn't necessarily have to win a fight by outscoring his opponent. He just has to be effective in cutting off the ring, getting his opponent into the corner, and then finally knocking them down or stopping them. And that's a factor I never really took into consideration when thinking of Gennady Golovkin versus Alvarez. Now, Golovkin was missing a whole lot of punches, but so was Angulo until he caught Erislandy Lara with a punch. So what I'm saying is, Dave Moretti and Don Treller were factoring that in. I didn't think that Gennady Golovkin was very effective with any of his punches because most of his punches, the only thing that actually was working for him was the jab. And the jab wasn't a powerful jab. It was just a probing jab. And he would keep on tapping Alvarez on his gloves, or sometimes he would catch him on his forehead when he would lean in on him. And Alvarez would allow him to do that, to bait him in, to counterpunch him. But Alvarez needs to stop doing that so much. That's what he needs to know. Otherwise, it'd be too predictable. You need to be kind of a bit elusive, and yet just predictably enough to spring the trap. Nonetheless, I digress. So Dave Moretti and Don Treller, and I think the bulk of the audience, seeing Gennady Golovkin pressing forward and pressing the action, they gave him credit for doing that, even though it was not very effective. But they probably assumed that it would be effective as the fight went on, and to some degree it was effective, even though Saul Canelo Alvarez still handled him. Adelaide Bird, on the other hand, would be looking at the defense of Alvarez and how good his defense was in this fight. And she probably factored that in. He was making Gennady Golovkin miss so much. And she probably factored in his boxing IQ and the fact that he was landing the majority of the powerful punches, and they were clean and effective. So maybe she was seeing what we usually see of a Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight. She was seeing Canelo as a Floyd, even though he was much more aggressive than Floyd. He'd fight Gennady Golovkin in the center ring, sometimes back off to the ropes. Sometimes Gennady Golovkin would push him to the ropes. But because Gennady Golovkin, maybe for her, didn't cut off the ring for the majority of the fight, he did start doing that in round 9 and round 11. But he wasn't doing it successfully because obviously in round 12, Canelo wasn't being cut off at all. But the fact that he was not able to do that for the majority of the fight, I believe that's what made her get her decision the way she did. All of this, though, to say, when we look at the fights like Benavidez versus Ronald Gavril, Gavril being very effective landing body punches and still using his jab to stay on the outside, and not really pressuring Benavidez. Benavidez is still the guy on the outside, but he's pressuring Gavril more, and they're mainly fighting in the center of the ring. I can see how, for instance, Adelaide Byrd and Dave Moretti would be going for Benavidez because he's boxing Gavril, and then when he becomes explosive, he really is the one landing the hardest shots on Gavril, and Gavril has to basically go to defense to try and get away from it. But I also saw the good work that Gavril was doing to the body, and he was landing regularly to David Benavidez's body, and David Benavidez had no answer. He tried to change stances, that didn't work, and Gavril literally got the results of his labors, his body punching, by knocking down Benavidez in the 12th. So this is probably what Glenn Trowbridge was seeing. So you can have different views by different judges, and they can score the fight differently because of that. You know, sometimes they go in, and even though they don't think they have a bias, they may have a bias towards a young fighter like David Benavidez, so they're looking at him more, they're looking at Ronald Gavril, and vice versa. So I'm just saying that sometimes that's how it happens. Now, what's very interesting is when there is unanimous decision by all the judges. It means that the fighter emphatically made his point that he was the better boxer. So when you get a unanimous decision like Juan Carlos Payano versus Alexis Santiago, where all the judges agree to different extents and different lengths, that Payano beat Santiago, that's a comprehensive win. And you can clearly see by the margins here, it was like 9 rounds to 1 or 10 rounds straight. Okay? And it doesn't matter what style you have. In this case, the judges see that the other guy, he wasn't successful in anything, and the guy who won, he was successful in everything he was doing. That's why there's a case for Golovkin versus Alvarez, and probably why it ended up being a draw. Dave Moretti probably thought that Gennady Golovkin was just successful enough in his game plan to be able to get to Canelo later in the fight, and so he probably gave the fight to Gennady Golovkin because of that. Whereas Adelaide Byrd probably thought that Canelo was doing an excellent job making Gennady Golovkin miss and make him pay, and he was actually effective even down to the last round of the fight. And the fact that Gennady Golovkin couldn't get him out of there, even though he was the bigger, stronger guy with all the advantages, the reach, the power, the jab, all those advantages, and he still couldn't get him out of there, probably persuaded her even more that Canelo was winning this fight hands down. So, different perspectives. Of course, Dave Moretti would also be looking at the pressure that Gennady Golovkin was putting on Canelo, and maybe he was going for the pressure fighter in this case, looking at the pressure fighter more closely, even though he's missing a lot of punches like Alfredo Angulo. He starts to pick up as the fight goes along, and then he starts to land 1 or 2 punches, 3 or 4. You know, he starts to land punches on Canelo as he starts to figure out the style that he's dealing with. So that's probably what happened. And Don Trella now, he was probably like, Canelo early in the fight, Golovkin later on in the fight. I'm going to call this a draw. You know? So different judges have different perspectives. What a fighter like Canelo Alvarez or Gennady Golovkin needs to do is be so emphatic in their performance for the judges, because you're performing for the judges basically, and so clear in what you're doing that there's no doubt in the judge's mind that you're winning the fight. That's what they have to do. And in this case, they didn't have to convince me. I knew Canelo won the fight, but it needs to be even more obvious that he's beating Golovkin. For Canelo, it would be counterpunching him. He needs to counterpunch Golovkin more, especially if he's going to stay on the ropes. What Floyd Mayweather would do is make you pay, and he would do it with sharp, crisp shots, and he'd make sure that the opponent backed off of him after they waste their energy. The other thing is Canelo needs to go to the body of Golovkin. If he hurts him to the body and he sees him, hit him again. You got to hit him to the body again. Look to find and hit him again. Push him back while you're hitting him. With Golovkin, he needs to cut off the ring. He needs to cut off the ring, make Canelo go somewhere else he doesn't want to go. Make him do things he doesn't want to do. Golovkin needs to keep on pressing the action, use his jab as much as he possibly can, and don't tee up on power shots unless your jab is consistently landing. So that's the advice I would give to Golovkin. That's the advice I give to Canelo. I know already who I think will win the rematch, and I know that my prediction for the stoppage didn't happen this time, but I believe Canelo, knowing what he needs to do, would produce a stoppage next time. But all in all, what I'm saying to you guys is that judging is something which to some degree is subjective for the people who are judging fights. And they may favor a certain style over another, or they may favor what we call effectiveness of a fighter over the effectiveness of another, even though that other doesn't seem effective. You know, Angulo didn't seem effective against Lara. He dropped him twice. Okay? Golovkin didn't seem effective against Alvarez, but he was really putting more pressure on Alvarez to respond to it. And he had some limited success, but he had success at it because everything else wasn't working. So I hope you like this video. If you would like to see more of these videos, let me know. Leave your comments in the comment section below. On that note, you guys have a great one.